She told me our marriage had become predictable and she needed excitement to feel alive again. I didn't compete with fantasy. I accepted the overseas promotion, expanded my portfolio, and let silence replace debate. She reached out when excitement didn't pay bills. You've become so comfortable. Like furniture. Like something I stopped noticing. She said it on a Tuesday. Not during a fight. Not after something went wrong. She said it while I was making dinner. Pasta, her favorite, the kind with the sun-dried tomatoes she used to ask me to make every week. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, one shoulder leaning against the frame, and she had this look on her face that I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not sadness. Something worse. Boredom. I turned down the heat on the stove and looked at her, and I remember thinking, how do you respond to that? What do you say when the person you build a life with looks at you like you're a piece of old furniture they're considering donating? I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at her, and she looked at me, and somewhere in that silence, I felt something shift, not break, not crack, just quietly move, like tectonic plates adjusting under the surface of something larger than either of us understood yet. What does that mean? I finally asked. She exhaled, walked to the kitchen island and sat down on one of the stools, and she did this thing she always did when she was about to say something difficult. She tucked her hair behind one ear. It means I love you, she said, but I'm not sure I'm in love with you anymore. I think I need more. I think I need excitement. Something that makes me feel alive. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 34 years old, married for 6 years, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city that we'd picked together, decorated together, argued over paint colors and couch fabric, and whether the bookshelves should go on the east wall or the west wall. I had a career I was proud of, a marriage I thought was good, a life I had genuinely believed was what we both wanted. And she was sitting 3 feet away from me telling me that none of that was enough. I turned back to the stove, stirred the pasta, not because I was avoiding the conversation, not because I was shutting down, but because I needed a second to understand what I was actually feeling, and what I felt, underneath the disorientation and the quiet sting of her words, was something surprisingly calm. Like the moment before a storm when the air goes completely still. Excitement, I repeated. Yes, she said. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to want. I didn't say it was. She looked at me like she was expecting a fight, and I think part of her wanted one. A fight would have meant she could be right about something. A fight would have meant passion, which is its own kind of excitement. But I just nodded slowly, and I said, okay, I hear you. And that, I think, is what started everything. I should give you a little context, because this story doesn't make complete sense without it. We'd met when I was 26 and she was 24. She was bright, charismatic, had a laugh that could fill a room, and she had this quality I'd never been able to fully describe. This restlessness, this hunger for experience, this sense that she was always reaching for something just beyond the horizon. I fell in love with that quality. I thought it was beautiful. What I didn't fully understand at 26 was that the same quality that made her magnetic could, under the wrong conditions, become something else entirely. We got married after 3 years together. The wedding was exactly what she wanted. Not what I necessarily wanted, but I didn't care. Watching her happy was enough for me. The first 3 years of marriage were good. Different good than dating, but still good. We settled. We built. We became what people mean when they say a couple. But somewhere around year 4, I started to notice small things. She'd get restless on weekends. She'd start talking about people she knew who were doing interesting things, friends who were traveling, colleagues who had pivoted careers, acquaintances who seemed to be living louder than us. I didn't ignore it. I noticed it, filed it away, and told myself it was just a phase. Maybe I was wrong not to push on it sooner. Maybe if I had, we would have had this conversation a year or 2 earlier and figured out whatever needed to be figured out. But I didn't push. I held steady. I did what I'd always done, which was to give us stability and trust that stability was something worth building on. And then she stood in our kitchen doorway and called me furniture. She didn't leave right away. That's the part people always assume when they hear the beginning of this story, that she packed a bag and walked out. She didn't. What she did instead was something more complicated and, in some ways, more painful. She started pulling away while staying exactly where she was. She'd come home from work and go straight to her phone. She'd decline when I suggested dinner out. She started going to a new fitness class 3 evenings a week, and I was happy about that. I thought, good, she found something she enjoys. I encouraged it. But she also started talking about a man at her office. Let's call him the colleague. At first it was casual. He's so interesting, you know? He has all these stories from when he worked abroad. He's done everything. I'd nod, ask a polite question, not think much of it. Then it became more frequent. His name would come up at dinner, at breakfast, on weekends when we were just sitting around. He's teaching himself Italian. Just because. Isn't that cool? He went skydiving last month. He said it was terrifying, but he's already planning to go again. He thinks routine is the enemy of a full life. He told me that today, and I've just been thinking about it ever since. I listened to all of it. I never said what I was actually thinking, which was, I wonder if she realizes that he's so interesting is a feeling she's using as a mirror to reflect what she thinks she's missing. Because I knew, even then, that this wasn't really about me not being exciting. It was about her looking for permission. Permission to want more than what we had, and permission to pursue it without guilt. And if she could just frame it as a flaw in me, in my steadiness, in my reliability, in my very furniture-ness, then what she wanted would feel less like a choice she was making and more like something that was simply happening to her. But I didn't say any of that. I made dinner, and I went to work, and I continued investing in my portfolio, and I waited. About 2 months after the kitchen conversation, she came home with something different in her posture, a kind of brightness, almost electric. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she said, I've been thinking about us a lot. Okay, I said, and I think we need space. I think I need space to figure out what I actually want, what makes me feel alive. I think I've been so focused on us, on this life, on being stable and responsible, that I've lost myself somewhere in all of it. I looked at her carefully. What kind of space are you talking about? She bit her lip. I don't want to separate officially. I don't want lawyers or anything like that. I need room to explore, to find myself again. And there it was, dressed up in the language of self-discovery, but what she was actually asking for was permission to pursue whatever she was already pursuing while keeping me as a safety net underneath. I understood that, clearly, cleanly, without any fog. And here is where I made the most important decision of everything that followed. I didn't fight it. I didn't beg. I didn't rage. I didn't issue ultimatums or cry or ask if this was about the colleague. I sat there, and I thought very carefully about what I actually wanted. Not what I was supposed to want, not what would look right or feel dramatic, what I actually wanted for my own life. And I said, okay, if that's what you need, I won't stop you. She blinked. I think she expected more resistance. But I want to be clear about something, I continued. I'm not going to put my life on hold while you figure things out. I've been offered a promotion, senior director position. It comes with a relocation to Singapore for a year, possibly 2. I've been sitting on it because I thought we should make that decision together. But if we're each making individual decisions right now, I'm going to accept it. The look on her face changed so quickly. The electric brightness dimmed. Something more complicated moved in behind her eyes. Singapore, she said. Singapore, I confirmed. You'd just leave? You just told me you needed space, I said. Space works in both directions. She didn't have an answer for that. I accepted the position 2 weeks later. It wasn't impulsive. I want to be clear about that. I'd been considering that offer for 3 months before the kitchen conversation ever happened. It was a legitimate career move, a significant step up, a substantial increase in compensation, and work that genuinely interested me. I'd held off because I loved my wife and I believed in our marriage, and I wasn't willing to make a unilateral decision about something that would affect both of us. But she'd changed that equation when she told me she was stepping back to find herself. So I stopped waiting. I told my company yes. I started preparing for the move. I booked the flights. I arranged temporary housing. I began the logistical process of transitioning my life to a different country for the next 12 to 24 months. She watched all of this from a strange distance. She'd ask questions occasionally. Have you found an apartment? Or what's the time difference? Or will you be able to come back for the holidays? Practical questions. No emotion underneath them. Like she was managing information rather than talking to her husband. I answered everything honestly and without drama. And here is something I will tell you plainly. That period of quiet, of just moving forward without resentment and without begging, was one of the most clarifying experiences of my adult life. I started waking up earlier. I started running again. I'd let that slip over the past couple of years. I started reading more. I started thinking more carefully about what I actually wanted my life to look like, independent of what we had built together. And somewhere in that process, I realized that I had been, in a quiet way, disappearing. Not dramatically, not in any way that announced itself. But slowly, over years of prioritizing the relationship over everything else, I had let the edges of myself go soft. I'd stopped pursuing things that interested me because I was always calibrating to what she wanted, what would make her happy, what would keep the peace. She called me furniture. But the truth is, I had made myself furniture. Functional, reliable, invisible, and I was done with that. I landed in Singapore on a Thursday morning in October. The city hit me differently than I expected. It was organized, clean, almost intimidatingly efficient, and it moved at a pace that matched something restless in me that I hadn't acknowledged in years. I'd organized a service department for the first 2 months until I found something more permanent, and I threw myself into work with a focus I hadn't felt in a long time. The role was demanding. Good demanding. The kind that requires your full attention and rewards you for giving it. I had a team of 11 people across 2 time zones. The projects were complex. The stakes were real. I stopped thinking about anything except what was in front of me. That's not avoidance. That's triage. She texted occasionally. Not often. How's it going over there? Is the food good? I saw something on the news about Singapore. Is that near you? I answered everything. Kept my responses honest and warm but short. I wasn't cold. I wasn't punishing her. I just didn't have anything to perform anymore. I wasn't trying to make her feel something. I wasn't trying to show her what she was missing. I was just living my life. And then, about 6 weeks after I arrived, I got a message that was longer than usual. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I feel like we left things in a strange place, and I wonder if we should talk. Really talk. About everything. I read it twice. Then I put the phone down and finished the report I was working on. I replied that evening. I'm open to talking, but I want us to both be honest about what we actually want, not what we think we're supposed to want. When you're ready for that conversation, I'm here. She didn't reply for 4 days. In those 4 days, I made a decision that had nothing to do with her. My company's regional director had mentioned, twice now, that there were opportunities to expand into markets beyond our immediate portfolio. The kind of lateral growth that, handled well, could compound into something significant over 2 to 3 years. I had also been quietly managing my personal investment portfolio throughout all of this. Nothing reckless. Methodical additions to positions I'd researched carefully, a couple of REITs, some index exposure, a small allocation to a sector I'd been watching since the previous year. When I left for Singapore, my personal financial position was solid. 8 months in, it was considerably stronger. Not because I got lucky. Because I had time and clarity and no one needing something from me every hour of the day, and I used all of that to make careful, informed decisions. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it matters to how this story ends. Her reply, when it came, was not what I expected. I miss you. Just that. No preamble. No qualification. I stared at that message for a long time. What I felt was complicated. Not the surge of hope I might have expected. Not warmth exactly. Something more like recognition. Like I was reading something I'd already predicted in some back corner of my mind. I miss you too, I wrote back. But I don't think that's the conversation we need to have. Then what conversation do we need to have? What happened with the colleague? Another long pause. Longer than 4 days this time. 8 days of silence. And then, can we call? We got on a video call on a Saturday morning for me, which was Saturday evening for her. She looked different. Tired in a specific way. Like someone who had been doing a lot of living and hadn't found what they were looking for on the other side of it. She told me what happened. Not in graphic detail. Not the way I think part of her expected me to demand. She told me that she had spent time with the colleague. That it had been exciting in the beginning. Exactly what she said she was looking for. New. Electric. Unpredictable. And that somewhere around the 3rd month, the unpredictability stopped being romantic and started being exhausting. He was exciting the way a thunderstorm is exciting. Thrilling until you're standing in it soaking wet wondering where you're supposed to sleep tonight. He had no financial stability. He had no plan. He moved from thing to thing the way he described moving from experience to experience. And it was great content for dinner conversation, but the actual logistics of a life built that way are relentless and grinding. She didn't say all of that in those words. But that was the shape of what she told me. I made a mistake, she said. I thought I knew what I needed. I was wrong. I looked at her through the screen. She was waiting for something. I could see it in how she was holding herself. This careful, poised waiting. Like she was bracing for whatever came next and hoping it would be forgiveness delivered cleanly, like a wrapped package. I appreciate you telling me, I said. Is that all you're going to say? What else would you like me to say? I don't know. Something. Anything. You're so calm. Would you prefer I wasn't? She stopped. I don't know what this means. For us. I don't know if you want to come home. Or if you even think of this as home anymore. I thought about that carefully. I think we need to be honest with each other about something, I said. And I want you to hear me clearly. When you told me our marriage was predictable and that I was like furniture, that was painful. Not because it made me feel inadequate, but because I realized I had allowed myself to become someone I didn't fully recognize. And coming here, doing this work, having this time, I've remembered who I am. I'm not the same person who moved into that apartment with you. I'm something more than that now. And whatever comes next has to be built on the actual truth of who we both are. Not a fantasy either of us is chasing. She was quiet for a long moment. Are you saying you don't want to come back? I'm saying I don't know yet. And I think that's the honest answer. She started crying. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way some people cry when they've run out of arguments. I'm sorry, she said. I think I was looking for something outside of us that was actually just a feeling I needed to find inside myself. Maybe, I said. But you have to understand, you can't unring that bell. You told me who I was to you. You acted on that. I can't just receive an apology and have everything reset to what it was before. So what does that mean? It means I need more time. And I think you do too. I stayed in Singapore for the full 2 years. Not to punish her. Not to make a point. Because I was genuinely thriving. And I wasn't willing to cut that short just because the calendar felt like it was the right time to return. My team's performance in that period exceeded targets by a significant margin. I was offered a path to a VP role contingent on my return and willingness to take on a broader portfolio. I accepted. During those 2 years, she and I talked. Not constantly, not on any fixed schedule, but regularly enough that we stayed real to each other rather than becoming abstractions. She got a therapist. She started being more honest in our conversations than she'd ever been in our marriage. It was strange. We were more truthful with each other at 4,000 miles apart than we had been sitting in the same kitchen for 6 years. She told me things about herself she'd never said before. About how she'd grown up in a house where stability was synonymous with stagnation. About how her father had been a steady, quiet man who her mother had spent her entire life criticizing for not being more adventurous. And how she'd absorbed that framework so completely that she'd started applying it to me without ever examining where it came from. I told her things too. About how I had spent years shrinking myself in service of what I thought she needed. About how I had never once told her that I was unhappy, not because I was happy, but because I had equated keeping the peace with being a good partner. Those were hard conversations, necessary ones. And slowly, without either of us announcing it, the terms of what we were to each other began to shift. I came back on a Monday in November. She picked me up from the airport. I hadn't told her what flight I was on, just the day. She'd had to figure out the rest herself, which meant she'd been standing at the arrivals gate for almost an hour by the time I walked out. She was holding a coffee from the airport cafe, and she looked different. Good different. There was something steadier in her that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Less electric. Less restless. More present. We looked at each other for a moment across the arrivals hall. And then I walked over and she handed me the coffee, which was exactly the right gesture. Not a grand romantic move. Not a dramatic reunion. Just something warm and practical offered to someone who had just gotten off a very long flight. Welcome back, she said. Thank you, I said. We walked to the car. We didn't move back in together immediately. That's a choice I think surprised people, or would have, if we'd told anyone the details of what our arrangement actually was. I rented a place about 20 minutes away. Not because I was punishing her. Not because I didn't believe her apology was real. But because the person who had moved into that apartment with her 6 years ago would never have done that. He would have rushed back to familiarity and called it forgiveness. He would have accepted the apology and immediately tried to rebuild everything back to exactly what it was, as if the entire preceding 2 years were a detour rather than information. I wasn't that person anymore. I needed to see if what we built fresh, from a more honest foundation, was something worth building. So we dated. That's the only word for it. Even though it sounds absurd. We were legally married people who went on dates. We went to dinner. We went to an exhibition at a gallery she'd been wanting to see. We walked through a farmer's market on a Sunday morning and argued, amiably, about whether the price of a particular jar of honey was justified. We were deliberate with each other in a way we had never been before. And it was good. Not exciting in the way she'd originally said she needed. Not electric or thrilling. But good in the way that something real is good. Substantial. Worth trusting. About 3 months after I came back, she asked if we could talk seriously about what we were doing. About whether we're actually rebuilding this, or whether we're just comfortable again, she said. I appreciated the directness. It was new. I don't think we're comfortable, I said. I think we're doing something harder than comfortable. Comfortable is what we had before. This is intentional. She thought about that. I want to come back, she said. To us. I want to actually rebuild this. But I need to know that you want that too. Not because it's practical, not because it's what we're supposed to do, because you actually want it. I want it, I said. But not the same version we had before. What version then? One where we're both honest. Where neither of us shrinks. Where if something isn't working, we say it before it becomes a wall we can't see over. Where your restlessness isn't something I ignore, and it isn't something you misdirect. Where my steadiness isn't something you take for granted, and it isn't something I hide behind. She was quiet for a while after that. That sounds like a lot of work, she finally said. Yes, I agreed. It is. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I want to do the work, she said. Now, I want to tell you about the part of this story that didn't resolve the way you might expect. Because there was a second conversation. A conversation that happened not through text or video call or any of the careful dialogues we'd been having across those months. It happened through her. She came to me about 4 months after we'd officially reconciled, officially moved back under the same roof, officially decided to try again. She sat me down one evening and she said, I need to tell you something, and I want you to know I'm telling you now because I don't want any more secrets between us. I said, okay. He reached out, she said. The colleague. She looked at me steadily, and I respected her for that. She didn't look down, didn't hedge. He sent a long message. He said he'd been thinking about me, that he realized too late what he had, that he thinks about our time together. And what did you say? I asked. Nothing. I didn't reply. Why are you telling me? She was quiet for a moment. Because 6 years ago, I would have turned that into something. I would have let it feed whatever I was hungry for. And I would not have told you. And the fact that I'm here, telling you, and the fact that when I read that message the first thing I thought was how to tell you and not how to respond to him, that felt important. Like something I needed you to know. I looked at her for a long time. Thank you, I said finally. That's it, she asked. Just thank you. What else would you like me to say? She almost laughed. You said that to me 2 years ago over video call. I know, I said. Because the answer is the same. You did the right thing. The conversation is closed. She leaned against me, and I let her, and we sat there without talking for a while. I want to say something about the money, because people always ask about the money. When I accepted that Singapore role, my salary increased substantially. The work I did there, combined with the investment decisions I made during those 2 years, put me in a financial position that I hadn't anticipated being in until my mid-40s. That wasn't why I went. It wasn't the primary reason I stayed as long as I did. But it was a consequence of removing myself from a dynamic that had been, without my fully recognizing it, keeping me smaller than I was capable of being. When she told me our marriage had become predictable, what she meant, what I think she actually meant, underneath all the other things she was saying, was that she was afraid. Afraid of the flat line. Afraid of a life that had become its own conclusion. And she channeled that fear outward, toward me, toward the colleague, toward the idea of excitement as a destination rather than a quality of attention. I didn't channel my fear anywhere. I redirected it into motion, into work, into decisions. And the interesting thing about that, the thing I've turned over many times since, is that what she was looking for, aliveness, a sense of being genuinely engaged with your own life, was never outside either of us. It was always a question of what you choose to pursue and whether you let yourself want things clearly enough to go after them. I chose. I went after things. And when I came back, I brought the version of myself that doing that had made. There's one more piece of this I want to share. About 8 months after we got back together properly, we were at dinner on a Friday night. Not anywhere special. A neighborhood place we liked. The kind of restaurant where they know your name after you've been a few times. We were talking about nothing in particular, something she'd read, something that happened at work, whether we should look at a new place since the lease on our current apartment was coming up. And she paused in the middle of a sentence and just looked at me. What? I said. Nothing, she said. Just, I almost lost this. I almost threw this away. You did lose it for a while, I said. We both did some of that. But you came back, she said. You chose to come back. You gave me something worth coming back to, I said. You actually changed. Not because you were scared I wouldn't come back, but because you understood why you did what you did and you chose to be different. She shook her head slightly. I was so convinced that I needed something different. Something new. I spent so much time looking at everything we had and cataloging what was missing. I never once stopped to look at what was actually there. That's the thing about looking for excitement, I said. If you only know how to see the gap between where you are and where you want to be, you miss everything in the space you're actually standing in. She thought about that. When did you get wise? Singapore, I said. She laughed, and it was the same laugh I fell in love with 8 years before, the one that filled a room. But it landed differently now, not because she had changed it, because I wasn't holding my breath waiting to earn it anymore. I want to be clear about what I'm not saying here. I'm not saying the answer to a struggling marriage is always to leave. I'm not saying that accepting every ounce of pain with silence and stoicism is a virtue. I'm not saying that the person who was unfaithful automatically deserves a second chance because they grew. None of that. Those are individual questions with individual answers, and I'm not in the business of prescriptions. What I am saying is this. The moment she told me I was like furniture, I had a choice about who I was going to be next. I could have made that choice in anger. I could have turned it into a competition, tried to out-excite the excitement, chased something shiny to prove I was still worth wanting, begged and demonstrated and performed. I could have dissolved, collapsed inward, let the version of me she was criticizing become the whole story. Instead, I got quiet. Not the furniture kind of quiet, not the invisible kind. The kind of quiet that comes from knowing exactly who you are and deciding to be that, clearly, without apology, and letting the rest sort itself out. I moved to Singapore and I worked, and I grew my portfolio, and I ran every morning along the Marina Bay waterfront, and I called my father every Sunday, and I read every book on a list I'd been building in my head for 3 years. I let the silence replace the debate. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I'd finally understood that the right audience for the things I had to say was me. She reached out when excitement didn't pay bills. That's the truth of it, stated plainly. The colleague, for all his Italian lessons and skydiving and stories, could not offer her what she'd always had and stopped seeing. Not just financially, though that was real, and I won't pretend it wasn't part of the picture, but emotionally too. Because the thing about someone who lives entirely in the pursuit of the next thrilling thing is that they are not, in any meaningful way, present. They're always somewhere just ahead of where they are. And you can't build anything with someone who is always already gone. She figured that out the hard way. I won't say I was glad she had to, but I won't pretend I'm sorry it happened either. Because what we have now is not what we had before. It's better. It's a marriage between two people who both know exactly what they're choosing and have made the choice with eyes open. It doesn't have the insulated warmth of early love, that feeling of two people wrapped in each other before the world has tested any of it. But it has something more durable than that. It has history honestly faced. It has apologies made without guarantee of outcome and forgiveness chosen without certainty of safety. It has two people who looked directly at each other across a lot of pain and decided that what was on the other side was worth the crossing. Some people, when I tell pieces of this story, not all of it, not the way I'm telling it here, but pieces, ask me what the turning point was. What moment made me decide not to fight, not to compete, not to try to be something I wasn't in order to win back someone who had already partially walked away? And the honest answer is that it wasn't a moment. It was a long, slow, accumulating understanding that I could not save a marriage by making myself smaller to fit inside whatever idea she had of what was missing. I am a steady person. I am consistent. I am reliable. I like making dinner on Tuesday nights. I like knowing what the plan is for the weekend. I like routines that build on themselves into something you can eventually look back on and call a life. Those are not flaws. Those are not furniture. Those are the things that keep a life from flying apart when the wind picks up. And what I needed was not to become less of those things. What I needed was to remember that those things, in their truest form, are not the absence of excitement. They are the structure inside which a real life, a fully lived, genuinely exciting life, can actually happen. When she stopped looking over my shoulder at whatever she thought was on the horizon, she found that out too. Our apartment now is different from the old one. We moved when the lease was up, like we talked about at that dinner. We picked it together, and this time when we argued about the bookshelves and the paint and the couch, we both actually said what we wanted, and then we figured it out from there. The bookshelves are on the east wall. I won that one. The couch is a color she picked. She won that one. The paint in the bedroom is something we compromised on. Not either of our first choices, but something we both actually like. It's a small detail, but small details are the actual material of a life. I still make pasta on Tuesday nights. She still sits at the kitchen island while I cook. But now, when she looks at me, I know what I'm seeing in return. Not furniture. Not something invisible. Not something taken for granted. Two people, in a kitchen, choosing each other clearly. That's the whole story. And honestly, I wouldn't trade where we landed for anything. Not the promotion. Not the portfolio. Not Singapore. Not even for whatever version of easy this might have been if we'd never had to walk through it. Because easy didn't make us. The hard part did. And I'm grateful, even now, for every uncomfortable inch of it.